is the area that I grew up in. This is what this is called is, believe it or not, it's Buzzards Bay, Buzzards. And these islands here are called the Elizabethan Islands. And most of you have heard of Martha's Vineyard, and Cape Cod is up along this way. And the town that I grew up in is called Dartmouth, and it's located right around here. And we had houses on this little beach over here, and we lost 3 of them to hurricanes. Well, I wasn't around in 1938, but we lost a house in 38. Then we lost another one in 56, and then we lost another one in 1991. And this last island here is called Cuttyhunk, and there is no cars on the island. And my mother was an orphan, and her uncle was a fisherman on this island, and she was brought up by in the summertime by her uncle. Even to this day, during the winter months, probably 90 people live there, and in the summer months it could boom up to about 1,500 people. I do have a little fishing shack on this beach, and then we live up near Boston most of half the year. When we leave here, we go up to Boston. My wife is from Ireland. I met her in the States at a pub on Cape Cod, and that was quite a few years ago. And after the wedding, about 6 months later, I made my first trek to Ireland to visit her family, her mother and father, and stayed at their house down here in Clonegall. She came more often than I did, but I was working and tried to come every year. I probably did come every year, but it was only for short periods of time. We stayed at her mother and father's house, which is now a restaurant in Clonegall. And her father owned the pub next door to the restaurant. And we'd stay there. And then when her mother and father died, we'd stay at her brother's house next door over here. What I did when I came over here was I went to a tuxedo store, and I asked the owner of the tuxedo store, I said, would you happen to have a tuxedo with cigarette burns and rips and long-tailed tuxedo? And he says, I do, but we're going to throw them away or have them burnt. I says, I want to buy it. So I bought it for like $10, and I wore that old tuxedo to meet her family, and they must have thought I was a whack job. But anyhow, that's what I wore when I came over here for the first time. The land was originally my wife's father's farmland. He owned about 40 acres of land around this general area. And the first to build here was my wife's brother. He lives over here, and we live in the middle, and my wife's sister lives in the other house. And Tom was nice enough to lose a poker game to my wife, and the stakes were, I think it's half an acre of land to build a house on. I started collecting things because I grew up on a beach, and in the summertime we lived, I think I did point it, the area that I grew up on the map, and just grew up walking on the beach, picking up shells, picking up rocks. Eventually that turned into picking up wood and stacking it up, and later on making things with it as a kid, as any kid would do. My sister and brother were both trained fine artists, and my father said to me, enough of these fine artists, they're not going to make any money in life, you're going to business school. So that's what I went to. I went to a business school and really didn't take up driftwood and junk collecting and putting things together seriously till about 4 or 5 years ago. Hung on a wall or stuck on a base. Needs a lot of cleaning up, varnish, take the bark off. It's a beginning. It may sit in my garage for 6 months, or it may sit there for a week, and I'll think of something to do with it. Trying to figure out what to do with that. I think it's different shapes, you get different interpretations. And this I found in the back of Art Bank. They were throwing it away. So it is so heavy, and I think this beauty in junk, and that's what it is. I think a piece of junk, but it's different. So I'm trying to figure out what to do with that and that. I'm looking for another base similar to that, which is maybe a couple of final touches to be done on it. But I picked this out of the pile of firewood, and I said, I can't burn it. I have to do something with it and use it as a base. But it's so new that it's very difficult to get the bark off. So I've been using a saw. I've been putting it on the stove to burn it off. And it'll eventually come off and be as smooth as that once I put some shellac on it. Now, where am I going to go from there? I have no idea. It'll be a base, and when I find something to put on top of it, I'll put it on there. I found the top of this bench on the side of the road. It was every day there must be about 10 or 15 big lumber trucks that come by, and this is obviously a small piece that fell off the truck, and it looked like a piece that I could make a bench out of. And I had this piece and put these other two pieces on, and it's a nice solid bench, and I made that last week. I find a lot on this river, the Derry River. I found this piece on the river. I find a lot going up some of these alleyways leading to the farms. They're all wrapped around trees and vines. Yeah, I think I found this one along the river, wrapped around a tree. I painted it black and so it stands out a bit. And I think that's another vine from a tree. That particular tree over there that you just took a picture of is covered with small little vines and eventually grow up to be big vines. I am not your typical artist. What I do is find things and find things to attach to it, so that it would be, this particular thing is set on a base. I scrape all the dirt and the moss off and coat it with a shellac, and perhaps put a few, well, this one, put a few stones to keep it balanced properly. And it's like a jigsaw puzzle. Some pieces I have hanging around here for a year, and then eventually I find something, that would look good with it, and put it all together and go from there. Living in Ireland is much different, I think, than the States. I love living in outside of Boston, but I also love living here as well. In Boston, it is the noise of planes, the noise of cars, the noise of sirens. Over here, the silence, the quiet, it's just so peaceful. Walking down the street in Bunclody, when I first arrived here this year in November, and I saw the sign Art Bank, I said, oh, this is interesting, and I walked into the door and met John and just said, well, maybe this is the year that I start making some new friends. I believe it was the first meeting that John set up this big chalkboard and scheduled people to have exhibitions of their work in this private, what he called the manager's room in the back of Art Bank. And I said, well, how about sometime in February? And so I took it over myself, and I think I had 20 pieces in it. Probably overpriced it, but the smaller, inexpensive pieces, some of those were sold, and I think I learned a good lesson on pricing items in this area. I enjoyed it. It was just, for me, I have not been doing this for any length of time. For me to sell something for 10 euros means a lot to me. Certainly would be nice to sell something for 1,000 euros, but I never will. So I'm very pleased when I sell a piece of my work that somebody appreciates it and is willing to pay some money for it. I think there's a certain beauty in old doors. I don't paint them, I just leave them the way that it, with the paint chipping off, and then pile a bunch of junk on it. And I think they look great. There is really no difference between American junk and Irish junk, but I find myself going to junkyards over here more often because I'm looking for things to do. As you can see, we live way out in the country, as my wife calls it, the ass end of nowhere. And so I look for things to do.